Friends, this is being recorded.
Greetings to you all. You are welcome to International Institute of Anthropological Applications, which is a virtual institute of Anthropological Association for Humankind. This institute is offering a course on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the agenda for nation building. Through this course, students and participants and scholars and practitioners will be able to understand Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's anthropological school of thought and how his anthropological understandings and knowledge was applied and proposed theoretical applications and to address the societal and economic and nation building related issues, so that we will be equipped and through this training to be instrumental in the days to come in the nation building process in our nation. So with this great intention, this course is initiated. So we are, I'm proud to have Professor P. Satyapal Kumar sir from the Department of Anthropology, Andhra University in Andhra Pradesh, to be the course instructor of this Dr. Ambedkar and the agenda for nation building. So now I request him, Professor P.D. Satyapal Kumar sir, to deliver his lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Pedrataya, and good evening, friends. I'm just joining from an ITDA. So kindly, in fact, now bear with me if there are any issues of clarity with regard to the network. And I hope I'm clear actually. So friends, this is the fourth lecture in this series of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and agenda for nation building. So we are touching upon, like in the sense, different facets that Dr. Ambedkar envisaged that certain issues, in fact, now have to be addressed to see that India as a society becomes, in fact, now a humane one, and all these aspects, in fact, now are quite pertinent for the holistic development of this country. So in this series, let's look into the aspect of cultural capital, actually, which the society, in fact, now shows up. So the details of this paper I have published in the Eastern Anthropologist, and the title I gave to that paper was Ambedkar's Exhumation of Cultural Capital and its Dynamics in Indian Society. The reason why I have used the word exhumation is that I have not found, any scholar working on Dr. Ambedkar, or in fact, no, like others who are working on social sciences, uh, dealing with this particular topic called as cultural capital, especially how it operates in the society, that too in a society which is a complex society called as Indian society. So, friends, we know that Ambedkar strived quite hard to make the productive castes of India, which were, of course, in the Varna system called as Shudra and Atishudras. The Constitution of India refers to them as the socially and educationally backward classes who form the majority of this country. So he would like to, in fact, elevate these productive castes of India as a governing class by emancipating them from uncontrolled and unmitigated exploitation. So, as an erudite economist, Ambedkar found enforced poverty, which of course we have dealt was at length in the last lecture. Enforced poverty is not just associated with the social and political oppression, but these producers were bereft of human personality, owing to the systemic and graded degradation uh, of the uh, castes actually. So Ambedkar's exploration of economics of caste brought to the light the command over cultural capital that privileged castes in this country maintain along with economic and social capital to perpetuate their hold over the system. So this lecture, in fact, no, concentrates more on the cultural roots of exploitation, as exposed by Ambedkar, in the light of Perry Bordeaux's, say, theory of cultural capital, to delineate various factors which continue to reproduce inequality and reinforce inequality in Indian society even in the 21st century. So let us, friends, look into the kind of importance that Ambedkar gave to culture. In the last lecture, when we are talking about, say, economics of, I think so, it is caste mode of production, we have seen that Ambedkar has defined culture as more fundamental category in which both, say, politics and economics intersected. So his diligent exposition of economics of Brahminism, one as a law of enforced poverty, and the other as the dogma of predestination. These two, in fact, now have been conditioning the victims as willful vassals, and it reveals the third dimension of capital, which is called as cultural capital. So, friends, so far we know that there is economic capital actually, which refers to the command over resources. And the second dimension of capital we understood from Karl Marx. When Karl Marx revealed, say, social capital as relating to the resources based on group membership, group relationships, and the networks of influence and support. So, social capital is a wonderful kind of a, say, proposition that Karl Marx brought out, which has very clearly explained. Hitherto, no economist has explained that the distinction between wage and labor. So, Karl Marx, in fact, like a great presentation, has changed the complete, say, what do you call, labor relations. Hitherto, in fact, no, they were considered as, in fact, like the relation between the kind of a bourgeois and also a proletariat. But he brought that to just, in fact, no, with say, relationship to the work and the payment of work as wage. But Karl Marx, in fact, now brought out that very important aspect called as labor. What is the relationship between the, say, the worker and his owner with regard to the relationship of labor, actually? So that is that we understood as a social capital. But on the other hand, cultural capital, friends, it concerns the forms of knowledge, skills, and advantages that confer power and higher status to certain groups in the society. So this is exactly what we just not about. So culture, how we can understand culture as a capital. Culture shares many properties that are characteristics of economic capital. While we see any competence becomes a capital, so far as it facilitates appropriation and unequal distribution, thereby creating opportunities for exclusive advantage to individuals or groups in the society. So this way, we can, in fact, like see culture as being a capital actually in the society. We will look into this quite elaborate. Ambedkar presented an elaborate illustration of such advantages which are monopolized by the twice born and are used to condition the behavior and attitudes of the servile castes for their social, economic, and political dominance of these leisure castes, actually. Rather, he was the first to trace the relation between an ideology, which, of course, in the academic parlance is called as a Brahminical ideology, the system, the caste system, and economic exploitation. He could, like relate to these relationships, how they perpetuate in the kind of a enforced poverty to the majority. These notions were comprehensively developed later into the concept of cultural capital, and disparities emerging out of cultural capital can be observed as reflecting in the discourse of the other form of capital, which is now being called as human capital. And That fourth dimension, actually, human capital is been much talked about, actually. So we see economic capital and then human capital are there in the vogue, they've been talked about. But the social capital, many of the marxist Marxist academicians, they talk about the social capital. But cultural capital has been brought into the kind of a academic discourse, much popularized by Perry Bordeaux, a French, kind of a socialist. But Dr. Ambedkar, even in 1940s, he was writing on these particular dimensions of cultural capital, actually. So let us see what is cultural capital. Let's of course see how these things have been, how this cultural capital and the aspects which are there intervening in between this particular concept. We will have a look into it. So yes, as I've been saying, that Bordeaux has developed this particular concept in uh, early 1960s, and he says maintaining. He said that economic obstacles are not sufficient to explain several disparities in the society. So the argument is that above and beyond economic factors, cultural habits and dispositions inherited by a family or a group are fundamentally important. The assertion is that cultural habits and dispositions comprise a resource which is capable of generating profits and advantages that are potentially subject to monopolization by individuals and groups, and they can be transmitted from one generation to the other generation. Weininger and then Laura also, way back in 2003, were discussing this, in fact, now in the realm of economics with regard to the transgenerational, say, advantages being percolated down uh, with regard to this, cultural capital, the aspects of cultural capital. Though Bordeaux used this concept, in fact, not to explain Bordeaux's much of the focus of Perry Bordeaux with regard to cultural capital is in the educational sector. He talked about, in fact, children belonging to different social classes, how their educational attainments, opportunities, and in fact, their attainments, uh, they have been couched into the concept of cultural capital. But otherwise, cultural capital has tremendous impact in the social stratification research, and especially analyzing social inequality in any social setting. So therefore, it becomes much more relevant in, in India with regard to the system of caste, which is a rigid type of social stratification. So let's see what are the types of, say, cultural capital that are involved. Essentially, we see, friends, three important, types of cultural capital, or maybe subsets of cultural capital, which are called as, the embodied type of cultural capital, the objectified cultural capital, and third is called as institutionalized cultural capital. So within, say, the embodied type, there are other forms of capital called as linguistic capital, which can be, in fact, now brought into the embodied type. And there is another thing called as symbolic capital. That symbolic capital can be, in fact, now bracketed into the objectified as, kind of a state. So now we see what is an embodified as, state of cultural capital. Cultural capital is embodied in the individual as personal characteristics and way of thinking molded through enculturation process that cannot be separated from its bearer. It may appear as an individual's achievement, but if we look into deeply into it, it so in fact relates to the social origin via exposure given to a set of cultural practices. So we understand, like, in a sense, different societies, different castes, in fact, now have their own patterns of income, enculturation. So therefore, we see, cultural capital as an embodied kind of a state within that. We will go into the details a little as, later. Mastery and monopoly over the use of a particular language or a way of speaking a language, uh, what we call as a modulation or a diction, basically, like, in a sense, they're all referred to as linguistic capital, and it becomes a form of embodied cultural capital. So the second subset is called as cultural capital as objectified state. This refers to changes which are owned, such as a work of art, antique, or a cultural goods which can be transmitted as an exercise of economic capital and symbolically, in fact, not displayed. The resources available to an individual on the basis of honor and prestige, but can be exchanged as goods for economic returns. These aspects we couch them as symbolic capital. For example, like in the sense in Indian society, whereas we can see rituals performed by a person are wearing certain symbols like a sacred thread, or in fact, no, like in the sense putting a kind of a vermilion or a pattern of, say, marks on the forehead. Uh, they all, in fact, no, fall under the symbolic capital. They themselves, in fact, no, become a kind of a capital to the bearer or to the group which is allowed to do that. The third type is an institutionalized state. This is institutional recognition of cultural capital held by an individual or a group. Institutionalization process, it performs a function actually for cultural capital, which is analogous to that performed by money in the case of economic capital. See, the institutionalization of these aspects of cultural capital itself, they become, say, organized, and they also get reinforced as long as the institution, in fact, no, say, operates in the society. In addition to the above types, cultural capital is essentially linked to other capitals like the field and a habitus, actually. A field can be a structure of social relations, which is explained by Laura King, wherein one type of cultural capital can be at the same time both be legitimate or not. So there is certain things called as, in fact, legitimacy or illegitimacy. So in the society, like in the sense, certain aspects become legitimate in certain contexts, or which are performed by certain groups, but the same thing are considered as illegitimate, in fact, no, which are performed by another group actually. So depending on the field in which, in fact, no, the operations they are located, it makes the legitimization of particular type of cultural capital completely arbitrary actually. Habitus, friends, is defined as a being a dispositions that are inculcated in the family but manifest themselves in different ways in each individual. Going by different, say, social scientists such as Harker, Webb, Gordon, all these people, in fact, they explain that much of the cultural capital can be derived from an individual and individuals' habitus formed and exhibited in daily interactions and changes as the individual's position within a changes. When the field changes, these habitus and its expressions are changed actually, which can be observed in daily personal routine. So, friends, cultural capital stands as the most important basis of power and privilege, which are critical to the occupational successes and the position which makes it possible to access heading positions in the economy and of the state. Like in certain groups are individuals from certain groups, in fact, now they hold that kind of a advantage so that they can take the elevator to the management positions, while many others, in fact, no, they have to take the space. So let's look into these aspects. And Ambedkar's, yeah, we see that lack of cultural capital becomes a substantial barrier for many groups actually in the society, and we will try to juxtapose these things in the Indian society. So, friends, Ambedkar's distinctive focus on the socio-economic value of cultural habits, dispositions, and skills explain vividly the nature of inequality, exploitation, and its dynamics in the caste society. So now let's look into the kind of an ideology which is called Brahminism, of which, of course, does not simply relate to the Brahmins, which is explained as that kind of an ideology where there is negation of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Brahminism is explained in brief like that, and it is kind of a, like in a sense, expresses itself in a system, a social system called as caste system. And let's look into the kind of a cultural capital in this system, and then the kind of an ideology. Friends, we know caste system as the most rigid form of stratification draws its rationalization and legitimation from Brahminism, the ideology, and the spirit of inequality. Brahminism as cultural capital stands as the most important basis of power and privilege to the to the minority groups. Brahminism, in fact, no, it stands as the cultural capital for the power and prestige of the minority groups, small groups actually, excluding the majority. In order to trace out the cultural roots of exploitation, it is imperative to understand how mechanisms of power are invested, colonized, utilized, involuted, and transformed and extended. I'm using the language of, say, Michel Foucault. Foucault said we need to understand. It's very important when you try to understand the cultural capital. We need to understand how the mechanisms of power they are invested and colonized, utilized and involuted, transformed and extended over the times actually. So Foucault, of course, he has lucidly discussed about the power and discourse, which probably in the forthcoming topics we'll discuss Michel Foucault with regard to the exposition of Brahminism as an ideology in Indian society. So, friends, what we understand is with cultural capital, certain groups they control, in fact, no, establish their control over the others. The mediators of power they glamorize and legitimize a particular discourse so that their operations of power continue to exploit the masses for their own ends. So this is a kind of a mechanism through which it happens. And the priority of Brahminism is the legitimization of an unnatural social order, which we have seen. Caste order basically, like in a sense, the system is an unnatural system. It has to be like in the sense, what do you call, run by an engine called a religion. In fact, no, acts as a, power basically. Uh, right. Dr. Pedratea, I'm getting a message that this meeting would end in 10 minutes. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Uh,
Deal with this?
Sir, actually, yeah. We will relog in, sir. The thing is, I'm accessing from the phone. Um, yeah, continue, sir. Continue.
Okay, then. I think so. Like there's a message came in, and I request you to deal with this. Yeah. So,
After that, I request all of us to join again. Um,
okay, that's fine. So here I'm discussing that the religion, in fact, no, employed as a powerful medium in justifying inequality as a natural phenomenon with a divine scene that we all understand. So, friends, as an embodied state, we have discussed that cultural capital expresses itself in three types of states: as an embodied state, and as an objectified state, and of course, as an institutionalized state. So, as an embodied state, cultural capital operates through the enculturation process. Uh, as a result, like in the sense, a person from so-called higher caste makes others recognize his superiority as a result of predestination. So, on the other hand, the so-called, in fact, now untouchable, too is groomed to concede his inferior position in the society. That's what I've said. In fact, now in this system of caste, the victim is say encultured as a willful vassal. They feel that it is predestined for them. So Ambedkar explains that, I quote, untouchables were treated as slaves because they were so socialized as never to complain of their lower status. The idea that they have been born to their lot was so ignored in their mind that it never occurred to them to think that their fate was anything so irreversible or so irrevocable, actually. Unquote. Such a situation paved way for the Brahmin to thrive and come in the way of the material well being of the lower caste. So, we will look into the other couched aspects within the embodied state, which is called as a linguistic capital. Linguistic capital is that, as we can see, a dialect called as Sanskrit, which initially was a dialect. After many centuries, it borrowed a script called as Devanagari, and it could debase and marginalize multiple discourses like folk, tribal, and other rural worldviews in this country's society, which of course I don't have to explain. We can see there are several parallel and several at different times of the in the history, rural like in the sense folk and then tribal traditions. In fact, like they have become these discourses were quite popular and they were very quite famous as well. But all those say discourses have been like in a sense later on uh, they've been sidelined, and we know the kind of a great tradition has become the quote unquote mainstream, actually stylized and mythicized as the language of the gods. Sanskrit, which is never people's language, has been accessible only to one section of the society, that is Brahmin, actually. The religious texts reveal through the mantra spelled in Sanskrit. The person, in fact, now who uses those mantras appropriates himself as the controller over gods and as the Lord on earth. We know that is called Bhudeva. He wields such a power that his word itself can result in a boon to those who surrender and turns a curse to those who dare to oppose. So that's such a situation, in fact, now has been there because anything, even today, which is spelt out in a particular language, it is believed that it carries with it a lot of divinity, or in fact, no, it has the power to communicate with the supernatural. Yeah. The corpus of Brahminical myths and texts still holds sway over the people of this country as fountains of knowledge. In order to control the masses and elite at every level of existence, uh, this particular discourse is developed in two versions of the two versions. The popular mode, actually, which is a medley of rituals, religio philosophical concepts, and myths that is given to everyone as a kind of a praxis. And then the other kind of discourse, which is actually a deeper doctrine drawn from the Vedas, Upanishads, and all the whole literature, which is quoted and highlighted by the Brahminical ideologues as the final authority. The point here is the the author of the text and the interpreter of the text, in fact, no, both are from the similar source. So this kind of a inbuilt duality is deliberately designed so that culture at every stage and level never goes beyond the control of this particular, say, privileged minority. So this is exactly what Ambedkar tries to explain the importance of culture in making people uh, and also through different forms of enculturation to recognize and then in fact now follow this kind of a discourse as an objectified state. The number two, cultural capital of Brahminism lies in ritualizing all aspects of life, so that every life cycle ceremony of the individual is controlled by the say the entrenched kind of a group through power of ritual. This group controls the actions of all, including the king, even the rural. In fact, no, rulers say actions are also can be regulated from by this kind of a discourse. The myth of Brahminical power lies in fashioning his word as curse, even controlling the king, not to talk about the commoner. Generally, in fact, no, in the say, common parlance, it is said that if a common person, in fact, no, like makes any kind of a serious kind of a thing, it is called as an abuse. But if it comes from if a kind of a say a person who is say designated as the religious kind of a say ideologue, that particular curse, when that particular abuse is understood or even treated as a curse. Even gods, in fact, no, even the kings sometimes gets surrendered by the curse. So this is a kind of an objectified state, as we can see. The elaborate and expensive rituals, which only rich people and kings can afford, are designed and developed to benefit the Brahminical class without resorting to any direct and violence means of ciphering of the surplus product. See, what we see is this economic looting, actually, loot of the majority, is not done directly in a violent manner. This ciphering of this particular, say, what do you call, resources is done very silently, very, like in a sense, conveniently, without resort to any kind of violence, because they use this cultural capital as an objectified state. So, friends, this aspect has been explained both by D.D. Kosambi and also Romila Thapar. Both said how ciphering of, say, resources silently is being done through this particular kind of a way, where the power of the ritual is being designed in a such a way, the rituals, in fact, no, in turn turns, in fact, no, like in a sense, as a supply line to the minority. The Brahminical system, friends, keeps away the majority from the acquisition of knowledge, ruling, and control over wealth. So, on one hand, the producers basically are not allowed to say acquire wealth, and on the other hand, like in the sense, the property groups, they are directly, in fact, no, allowed to siphon off the resources. Power, the institutions of education, power, and economy are reserved for the Brahmin, Kshatriya, and the Vaishya, we know respectively. And individuals belonging to these groups, they hold the cultural capital as monopoly. So education is denied in the first place, and in order to colonize the